Hello folks, welcome to week 3 of our online learning module. Today's lesson we're just going to be doing the two rules 7 and rule 8, risk of collision, and rule 8, action to avoid collision. And this will encompass with interpretation rules 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That will be what will be tested on this upcoming Friday. Okay, so let's get started. Again, the rule itself is highlighted in black and leads off the PowerPoint presentation, and then in white font is just a general description. You're going to notice that I talk about some of the stuff and re-reference it in the description, okay? I just want to make sure that I touch on all the key points here. So let's start off by reading this. Every vessel shall use all available means appropriate to prevailing circumstances and conditions to determine if risk of collision exists. If there's any doubt, such risk shall be deemed to exist. So if you're not sure if there's going to be a risk of collision, assume there is going to be. That's all that's saying, okay? What it's also saying here at the beginning is you got to use all available means for the prevailing circumstances to determine if this risk of collision exists. Proper use shall be made of radar equipment if fitted and operational, including long-range scanning to obtain early warning of risk of collision and radar plotting or equivalent systematic observations of detecting objects. Okay, so these rules were written a long time ago and they haven't changed. There is nothing in the collision regs that says you have to have a radar on board or anything like that, but every vessel you're going to go on now is going to have an operational radar, and you are going to use that operational radar for your long range detection because your eyesight can only detect at such a distance, right? And that's what we say, in sight of one another is one vessel can be detected from the other vessel visually, okay? And that also includes binoculars. So now they're talking about long range detection using your radar. So if you are using your radar, goes on here to say, assumptions shall not be made on the basis of scanty information. So, inaccurate information or a quick snapshot of a situation and then you make a decision. No, you're going to take your time, collect as much information about that situation so you make the right decision. And it says right here, especially scanty radar information. You can't just look at the radar and quickly say, oh, they're not a problem, or, oh my God, it's collision, and then you make your alteration. You take your time, assess the situation again with this radar, long range detecting, and make the right decision. In determining if risk of collision exists, the following considerations shall be among those taken into account. Such risk shall be deemed to exist if the compass bearing of the approaching vessel does not change, or such a risk may sometimes exist even when there is appreciable bearing change is evident, particularly when approaching a very large vessel or a tow or approaching a vessel at close range. So even though, okay, so you start taking compass bearings of a vessel. Take one 6 minutes. Take one in 12 minutes because you've detected them. You've used your long range detection, so there's plenty of time. That vessel could be an hour away, because you're doing your due diligence as an officer to watch and detecting these targets early. Okay, so for instance, where it mentions here a tow or a large vessel, okay? A tow, yes, you could see the tug towing. Fine and dandy. You've assessed the situation. It's not going to be a close quarter situation. What about that barge is 1,200 feet behind it? That may come into your path, okay? So situations like that, even though the bearing of the vessel doing the towing is changing, it still could bring that barge into the path and the collision. So here's my little description. So it is easy to get much closer to other vessels than you intend if care is not exercised, okay? So, again, if you are conducting your watch and you are doing your long range scanning and you're listening to your radio for any traffic in the area, you're never going to be in a situation where you have to make these snap judgments, okay? Or split second reactions. You never have to worry about that if you're doing your proper watch. If you were stationary and all other vessels moving around you, it would be relatively easy to grasp what was happening, or vice versa. If you were the only one moving and everything else was stationary around you, like say if you're out in an oil field and all you see around you is oil rigs, okay? Without the need for measurement of some kind, but because you're also moving, the process becomes more difficult, and the decisions have to be made quickly because you're not only moving towards them, they are moving towards you. Okay. Rule 7 stresses the need to check continually that no risk of collision exists, to eliminate any doubt that it does, and to guard against taking any action based on less than adequate information. So that's what we refer to in the rules as scanty information and scanty radar information. As a result, it is implied under Rule 7 that an officer of the watch's responsibility is that as soon as he or she sights another vessel, the officer of the watch must determine whether a risk of collision exists. The officer of the watch must not dismiss the other vessel as being the giveaway vessel, so the vessel that has to move out of our way because of its position relative to his or her own vessel, without determining whether a risk of collision exists. Okay, so we're going to learn that vessels that have the other vessel target on its starboard side, it is our responsibility. If you have a vessel on your starboard side, it is your responsibility to get out of its way. If that vessel is on its port side, is on your port side, then it has to get out of your way. What this is saying is, okay, just because you see it's on the port side, you're not automatically going to assume, okay, they have to get out of my way, I'm fine. I'm just going to keep on trucking the way I am. No. Every target that you detect by radar or visually, you have to assess it to see if it's going to be a risk of collision. The textbook method of assessing collision risk on any vessel is to take a bearing of any approaching vessel using a compass. If the bearing remains constant, the same, there is a risk of collision and action must therefore be taken. Okay, that's what we talked about in the rule. It says if the bearing stays constant, yes, there is a risk of collision. And then it goes on to say, even though the bearing may change slightly, there still could be a risk of collision. So let's say you take a bearing, first bearing was 120, second bearing was 118, third bearing is 122. You've got a span there of a couple of degrees. It's not enough. It's still a constant bearing. It's still a risk of collision. Okay, if nothing else, it's going to be a risk of a close quarter situation. You might not actually collide, but you're not going to be keeping that 2 mile CPA that we've talked about, 2 nautical mile CPA. Okay, so we've determined that there is a risk of collision. So now Rule 8 says, okay, you've done that. Now here's the action to avoid that collision. So let's just read the rule again, that's highlighted in black. Any action taken to avoid collision shall be taken in accordance with the rules of this part, and shall, if circumstances of the case admit, very important, please, 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 underline this, highlight it, get a tattoo of it on your arm, whatever it takes. They must be positive. That's the opposite of negative, right? You don't want a negative outcome, you want a positive outcome. They must be made in ample time. You got to do it early enough, okay? And you must do with due regard to the observance of good seamanship, okay? Use your common sense when you're doing it. B, any alteration of course or speed to avoid collision shall, if the circumstances of the case admit, be large enough to be readily apparent to the other vessel observing visually or by radar. A succession of small alterations of course and or speed should be avoided. I'm going to touch on this again in my description on the next slide, but here's what that's saying. If you decide, yes, there is a risk of collision, 1. Second, you are the one that's got to get out of the way. It's your responsibility. You are the giveaway vessel. When you make an alteration of course, you're not going to do little tiny alterations. Oh, I'll just do 2 degrees here. I'll just do 5 degrees. No, you're going to, my rule of thumb, 30 degrees. or you're going to see that what I've mentioned in an upcoming slide. Let's say it's a nice sunny day. You've decided, okay, I've got to make an alteration for this vessel, an alteration to starboard. Here's a good rule of thumb also. The sun's out, it starts on your starboard bow. You should make an alteration large enough that by the time you finish your alteration, that sun is now on your port bow. Okay? Could be any celestial body, a star, a moon. Okay? But that is a good rule of thumb. 1, 30 degrees. 2, take the sun, for instance, and put it on the other side of your vessel. And 3, by doing so, you're going to change the profile of the vessel. What the other ship is seeing of your vessel. The profile is going to change. What I mean there is, let's say it's a bit of a head-on situation. You have to alter starboard. Before you've made your alteration, what they're seeing is just your bow, right? The pointy end of your vessel. By the time you've made your starboard alteration, you've made it large enough. Now they're seeing the whole port side of your vessel. You've altered to starboard, and now what was once your bow, now they see the whole side of your ship. That tells me, if I'm on the other vessel, yes, they've, 1, recognized that there is a risk of collision, and 2, they've made the appropriate and large enough alteration to get out of my way. Okay? Number C here, if sufficient sea room, alteration of course alone may be the most effective action to avoid a close quarters situation, provided that it is made in good time, is substantial, and does not result in another close quarters situation. Action taken to avoid collision with another vessel shall be as to result in a passing of a safe distance. Please, again, remember this. This is the only answer Transport Canada is going to be looking for when it says, what type of action should you take to avoid a collision? Any action, here's the answer. Any action that results in a passing at a safe distance. Not 2 nautical miles, not by, you can't see the other vessel's bow anymore. This is the only answer that they're looking for, that it results in a passing at a safe distance. So again, this is something you should highlight in your rules and stuff like that. The effectiveness of the action shall be carefully checked until the other vessel is passed and clear. You just can't make this alteration and then walk away and not monitor this target anymore. You have to monitor this target until it is finally passed and clear, that there is no chance of a risk anymore. It is gone. It's diminished. Okay? Because situations might change. That vessel that you altered for, it might have altered also for some reason. Maybe it's heading. It has to get into a traffic lane, and it has to alter sooner than later. So yes, you made your initial alteration, fine and dandy, going to pass him by 2 nautical miles. Then he goes and makes another alteration, and he brings himself into another close quarters situation. So that's why you have to keep monitoring until they are finally, right here, passed and clear. Okay, rule continues. If necessary to avoid collision or to allow more time to assess the situation, a vessel shall, not may, shall slacken her speed or take all way off by stopping or reversing by means of propulsion. So if you got to want either avoid the collision altogether or take more time to assess the situation, then do it. The engines are there at your disposal. Okay? You pull back. And then you take your time. Okay? So, again, it goes back to no decision shall be made to avoid collision on scanty information. So you pull back, you assess the situation, the engine is there. It's there for you to use. You don't have to make a call to the captain or the chief mate, because by the time he gets up there or she gets up there, it might be too late. Okay? F1 goes on to say, a vessel which by any of these rules is required not to impede the passage or safe passage of another vessel shall, when required by the circumstances of the case, take early action to allow sufficient sea room. So if you come across, we're just a normal power-driven vessel, and let's say we come across one of the ones that we're supposed to avoid, not under command, restricted in its ability to maneuver, confined by its draft. If we come across one of those, then we're going to make so this is not avoiding collision. This is making sure that we do not impede their safe passage now. Same thing, we're going to make it, it's going to be positive, It's going to be large, and it's going to be done in ample time. That's all this is saying here. Number 2, I go on to describe it in a slide coming up also. A vessel required not to impede the passage or safe passage of another vessel is not relieved of this obligation if approaching the other vessel so as to involve a risk of collision, and shall, when taking action, have full regard to the action which may be required to the rules of this part. Okay, again, it's your obligation to stay clear of this vessel because you can't do anything to impede its passage. It's the same thing. It applies to the same for the action to avoid collision. Just, again, practice a good seamanship. Make it large. Make it in good time. And make it very apparent to that other vessel. Because due to some restrictions, either not under command, restricted visibility, or confined by the draft, they can't maneuver as well as you. Okay? And the third one is a vessel, the passage of which is not to be impeded, remains fully obliged to comply with the rules. Okay? So even though you are not under command, or you're restricted in your ability to maneuver, or you're constrained by your draft, this doesn't mean you can drive around with no regard for the rules. But, I can go wherever I want because my maneuverability isn't as good as yours. No, you still have to follow the rules, okay? You can't hide behind the rule that you're not under command and, I couldn't. You have to do everything in your power to prevent a collision. So, my little description here, having established that there's a risk of collision, hopefully while you're still good a ways away from the other vessel, you will determine what action is required if you are to give way vessel. Okay? That's through your plotting, checking its bearing. Course and speed changes must be such that they are obvious, both visually and on radar. Most of the most well-documented collisions between commercial vessels have come about because corrective action was only slight and could not be detected until it was too late. Okay, so I'll talk about here, you got to make that large course alteration so that you're changing the profile of your vessel, what they see from the other vessel. But you can read this here. I'll read it too. But these larger vessels give off huge wakes, right? They create huge waves. So if you got a visual of this other target, this other vessel, and you see what was once huge waves being sent out from this vessel because of its speed going through the water, if all of a sudden those waves are gone, that's an indication to you, okay, they've reduced their speed. Okay, they're either doing it to avoid collision with you or take more time to assess the situation. That's a nice visual along with seeing a course alteration. Okay, so I'll just read it here anyway. During daylight, a course change which brings the sun from one side of your vessel to the other is a very helpful in clearly showing the other vessel what you're doing. To stop or slow right down with minimal bow wave is more obvious than to just drop the revolutions of the engine, right? So you can, again, it's just like these small alterations, of course. You can't just pull back, okay, I'm going 20 knots. I'll just kick her back to 15. You're not going to detect that. You're not going to detect that visually, and it's going to take a long time for that vessel to even slow down to that. Okay, as we can see here in the example. However, you must remember that on a larger vessel, there is a lot of momentum, and slowing down will not be readily apparent in the early stages, and could additionally take an inordinately long time. For instance, a fully laden supertanker traveling at 15 knots and then coming dead slow on the stick, like going down to nothing, may not show any appreciable difference in speed for at least 2 to 3 miles. You're cutting it close then, right? So let's just say you've detected it 12 miles away, and now you're going to lose at least 2 to 3 miles of that trying to figure out, are they slowing down? Because it's taking them that long. It's not apparent. It's not as apparent as a course change. So you'll always want to do a course change first. At night, the best change of heading is one which shows the watchkeeper on another vessel a different configuration of your own navigation lights. Okay, so let's talk about lights. So you're sailing your head-on situation. You're going to see the one We're going to learn about the lights for later on, but you're going to see that white masthead light and your green and your red side lights. So if you want to show them that you've made your alteration to starboard, so let's say you're seeing your white headlight, your masthead light, and then your red port light and your starboard green light. You alter the starboard. By the time you're done, they should only see your red light. Okay? Your red port light, because you've altered to starboard. That's a perfect indication at night. Okay, you'll say that, you'll use those terms. Okay, I'm only seeing red, so you've known they've made their correct alteration to starboard. So, again, I told you this 2 nautical mile CPA that Transport Canada has ingrained into our head as being a safe distance. That's used everywhere. But let's talk about now in congested harbors. So what is the safe distance? So in Halifax Harbor, when you're sailing in, Halifax now has, you got the ferries going from Dartmouth over to Halifax. You've got all the supply boats going back and forth in and out of the Bedford Basin. Also then the Bedford Basin, for those of you who aren't familiar with Halifax, you got the Coast Guard. You also got a military base in Halifax Harbor. You also have cruise ships coming in and out of Halifax Harbor. So there's tons of traffic. Sometimes it's unavoidable. You're going to pass at least 1 nautical mile or even closer, okay? But if you are doing that, if you are passing close to these ferries, you're going to use your practice of good seamanship. You're going to slow down so you're not creating a huge wake, big waves, because I've seen it happen. A larger vessel passes a smaller ferry, and it just sends one wave right down the back deck, knocking over the motorcycles, the bikes, or whatever has been laid on this on the back deck of this ferry. Okay, so paragraph F was broken down into 3 parts, and I just got a little description of each one. So paragraph F usually causes concern as an interpretation. Very basically, it may be explained as follows. So number 1 part in paragraph F says that a vessel shall take early action to avoid impeding the passage of another vessel if it is one of the vessels required to do so. So you're going to take early action. You see that vessel, or you've identified it as a vessel that's not as maneuverable as you, and you have to get out of its way, do it early. Why not? They know right away. One less thing that other vessel has to worry about. Paragraph 2 says that even if a risk of collision exists, you are required not to impede the safe passage of another vessel. You shall take action and at the same time ensure that whatever action you do take is in accordance with the rules. Okay, I'll read that again. It says that even if a risk of collision exists, you are required not to impede the safe passage of another vessel. You shall take action and at the same time ensure that whatever action you do take is in accordance with the rules. Okay, it's just, if you follow the rules, okay, you don't have to come up with excuses for what you did if you've avoided the collision. Paragraph 3 says that even if you are on a vessel whose passage should not be impeded, or you don't get in the way of that vessel, and another vessel gets in your way, at the end of the day, normal steering and sailing rules applies. So again, know the rules, use the rules. Just wanted to leave off with this one slide. There is very little excuse for an officer to watch in open sea ever to find himself or herself in a close quarters situation or a collision risk situation. Okay? If you are doing your due diligence and following the rules and doing your early long-range detection, you'll never ever have to worry about a collision or a close quarters situation. Okay? So that's it for week 3 learning. Again, I'm going to have 10 questions. Also going to you're going to find in the week 3 learning for rules 7 and 8, and I'll have this slide presentation separately. Okay, so make sure you get all the required learning outcomes completed, and I'll see you guys Friday morning at 9 o'clock for our first term test. You'll nail it. See ya.